So thanks everyone for joining us today for this Emeritus College Travel Group meeting. And today we're going to have Jeff Davis, who's for the first time going to talk to us at this in this program. And he's going to talk about his experience in visiting Antarctica and Iguazu Falls. And I'm going to ask Jeff if he wouldn't mind introducing himself first of all, and then he can proceed with his talk.
Okay. Well, let me know if you can't hear me very well, but I am a retired pediatric hematologist, bone marrow transplant doc from Children's Hospital, and I worked there from 1991 to 2018 when I retired a bit early. But I had a little bit of a side hobby in that I was a flight surgeon in the U.S. Navy. Um, so So I was working a lot of hours doing both. Anyway, I had a lot of interaction with Paul, obviously with all of our brain tumor patients, and I probably BC Children's is the most amazing thing in my life that I've ever been a part of. Anyway. Do you want me to go ahead with the talk now, Paul?
Yeah, that's fine.
Ah, okay. So in January of this year, we went down to Antarctica and Iguazu Falls. And so early January, we flew down to Buenos Aires and spent a couple days in Buenos Aires just to we thought to acclimate a little bit because it was summer down there. And we just walked around Buenos Aires a little bit. We did visit this little part of town. I don't know if people have been to La Boca, which is a part of Buenos Aires that has these incredibly painted buildings, the whole area. We went to a dinner supper and had a tango dance show. It turns out, and I'll mention this later, but it turns out that, the tango is supposedly invented in Argentina until you go to another country where they tell you that they actually invented it. So that was kind of interesting. So we just, spent a couple of days and then we got on the cruise ship. And here we are leaving Buenos Aires, already out on the ocean, the eastern side of Argentina, or the eastern side of the coast, heading down to the Straits of Magellan. And it's quite a long trip. I mean, the total cruise was 17 days, and we were on the Sapphire Princess, which has about, I think, 2,600 people on board. And I have to say that it was not crowded anywhere that we went. We were never waiting in line to do anything, eat, walk around, and just going out and looking at stuff was just real easy. As dusk approached, we actually were getting close to the Strait of Magellan, and you can see they have their oil rigs out here in the ocean. And then it was pretty much dark, and I don't know if I owe my mouse. So we're coming down the east coast of Argentina, and you can see the pretty soon we're in Brazilian waters as we go through the Strait of Georgia. I mean, it's the Strait of Georgia. As we go through the Strait of Magellan, and we're headed to a town in Chile called Punta Arenas. So we get there the next morning. Oh, and I'll say, just because this map's kind of interesting, it's kind of hard to figure out how to get out of the Strait of Magellan on the west side, and you've got to go through some various waterways to get there. But the next night, we were headed over to a little town in the south of Argentina called Ushuaia. We'll just head to Punta Arenas. The morning, we obviously woke in and we had scheduled an excursion that morning, and we ended up walking around the town in the afternoon. You know, they have the usual monuments to all their heroes, and it was sort of an interesting town. It was not very crowded, and we just stopped in some places and got some snacks and just enjoyed walking around the city. Um, so we got on our excursion boat and we're headed out to Magdalena Island, which is a island out in the middle of the Strait of Magellan. And it is inhabited by one person. I suppose he works at the lighthouse, which you can see right here. But it seems like he'd be pretty bored out there as the only person. But they get a lot of visitors and they have a lot of penguins. So we spent a couple hours walking on the island, just amongst the penguins, and literally you're literally feet from the penguins. I guess I'll say at this point in time that all my pictures are with my iPhone. So I didn't have any fancy camera, although the iPhone's getting pretty good. And we did have a cadre of people on the cruise ship with their big telephoto lenses and everything, but I was able to take all these pictures with my iPhone. And we're literally just a couple feet away from these penguins, and they don't seem to care that we're, walking around. I must have been shaking. Took this picture, but there's a lot of penguins on this island, and here's a bunch of them that are kind of huddled together. But it was amazing the number of penguins as you walk around the island. You have the young ones and the moms and dads that are coming back from the ocean obviously have food in their guts that they're going to regurgitate for their young ones. And we're literally a couple feet away from them, and they don't seem to care at all. There's also a huge population of gulls on the island, and they have their young ones too, huddled around them. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, they did these little shows for us where they would make their sounds in the air, and they generally would just walk along with you as you're walking on the pathway. It's pretty interesting. So here's another schematic. So the island of Magdalena Island is actually a little bit further northeast of Punta Arenas. And it was kind of, we backtracked to get to it. Then we came back to Punta Arenas. So the next night cruise after we left later that evening is we went through the rest of the Strait of Magellan and then back in to these various canals to get over to the town of Ushuaia here. And this island here is the island, I can't pronounce it really, but Tierra del Fuego. And it's actually subdivided between Chile and Argentina. Argentina side's on the right side and Chilean side's on the left. And we didn't see too much as we went, as we might, because it gets dark. You see here where it's getting dark, and there was a glacier that was coming down to the water. But you can see it's also getting a little stormy, which we were a little bit worried about as we went south. So the next morning we woke up in Ushuaia, and Ushuaia is the Argentinians say is the most southern city in the world. It turns out on just south of Ushuaia, across the water, and a little further east is a little place called Fort Williams, and it's in Chile. And the Chilean government, I can't remember what year, but they passed a law saying that Fort Williams was a city, and thus it's the most southern city in the world. But the Argentinians don't go for that, and they pretty much stick to their little place. So Ushuaia is a pretty big city. We walked around a bit. We did another excursion where we went out with folks. So here's a picture of our friends, other Vancouver friends. Ushuaia Fin del Mundo, which means end of the world. And we did this little excursion to kind of a national preserve and walked around. Um, we didn't see too much in the way of wildlife, but in this area, although there were obviously some beavers going on with this big beaver dam here. Um, and and there's a ski resort actually just outside of Ushuaia, which actually looks pretty good if you're a skier. Um, but you can see the weather's clearing a little bit, so we are really happy about that. Here's the one picture I have of our Sapphire Princess. Um, it is a big boat. There's obviously a lot of little boats, smaller boats going down to Antarctica where you can do the exploration, kayaking, getting off the boat, and hiking onto the shore. But I felt like when we were down in the Antarctica, that we're in the middle of this total area, and it was literally just staring. It was literally you could just touch it with your hands almost. It was just right there. So we left to Ushuaia, and here's a picture of the moon coming up on the eastern side. So we're headed then into the Drake Passage. So the captain of the Sapphire Princess actually is from Edmonton, which I was pretty happy about. And he came on and said, "Well, the swells are 7 to 12 feet." And I've been in big swells before, but not, they were a lot larger than that. But with 7 to 12 feet swells that we encountered, you could hardly tell. The ship moved a little bit, but we could walk normally, and we weren't in any, didn't feel like we were in any danger. But the Drake Passage is, it's about 600 nautical miles that we went down. And the weather can get pretty bad, and the swells can get really bad. And we talked to a lady later on who was on one of the smaller cruise ships at the same time, and she said people were literally thrown against the walls of their walkways, and some people were injured. And she said it was really rough passage. So we were pretty lucky to have a smooth passage. So here's where we're headed. We're headed down to the Antarctic Peninsula. And you can see the Southern Ocean is on the left side, and then the Weddell Sea is on the right side. And the only reason I bring that up is because, I made that comment about Shackleton, and Shackleton's endurance cruise was all in the Weddell Sea, at least on his endurance boat. At the end, which I'll show you, they ended up in Elephant Island, which we visited. So the captain came on and the next morning when we and said, "Well, the weather." I figured I changed the itinerary totally, and we came down all the way to the south part of almost the 65th parallel. And entered the waterways around the peninsula way down south, which we were supposed to go to Elephant Island way up here first. But he said the weather was not good up there, and so we came all the way down here. Interesting enough, the weather was pretty amazing, where I thought. As we're sort of passing Anvers Island, you can see it's just, I thought, well, if this is what Antarctica is going to be like, I don't know. But as we got into the inner waterways, the water got really calm. It started clearing. And they're not very wide waterways, and the ship is just cruising along, and you have these remarkable views of mountains and glaciers and the snow. And my first thought was I was kind of glad I wasn't on one of those small explorer ships, because, getting off the boat and hiking on some of these shores of snow, I kind of do that off and on quite a bit, in Whistler and Park City and other places where I ski. So I didn't really think it looked like, other than the fact that I could say I was actually on the land. It was you were right there, and it was just amazing. And you can see there's like tons of icebergs all over the place, of every shape and size imaginable. And it was pretty amazing, the different shapes of the icebergs that we passed by. It just, you're just constantly blown away by the view from every side of the ship. We spent most of our time down on outside, down on the seventh deck, kind of walking around, and anywhere where you were, you had these most amazing views of the scenery. We weren't seeing too much in the way of wildlife, although it was early in the morning, and so I don't know if the whales were not really, or the penguins weren't really out yet. Um, so we just kind of cruised through these various waterways, and that you can see it's totally clearing up here. And the captain came on and said, "Well, if we would have went to Elephant Island, it would have been totally overcast right now." So we were pretty happy that we came this far south. Um, so here we are, getting close to the little research station that we're going to visit. Um, and oh well, here's a whale here in the upper right. They weren't putting on a show like the orcas, so that's a little disappointing if you're used to seeing orca whales. I thought I could go swimming, but the captain said no, he didn't think it was too good of an idea. Too cold. And here's a whale at least putting his tail up in the ocean. Yeah, there's a little bit more of a close up. And so here we are getting to Port Lockroy, and you can see the station is on this little island right here. This is a UK research station. There's a little two-masted schooner here, and there's the two-masted schooner as we're getting close to it. And here's the station. Now there's only 5 people at this research station, and they come for 5-6 months during the summer, and then nobody's there during the winter. It's an interesting little or station because it's hard to tell. Like one of the persons runs the post office there, and I guess you can mail stuff from their post office. Another person is in charge of keeping the grounds and the buildings, and then there's 3 other people, and they don't really have a lot of amenities there. They actually a couple of them came on board, took some hot showers, that we gave them food, and they gave us some talks on what they do. There's quite a few penguins on this little island that they keep track of and count, and I think that's most of their research. I should mention also that there were quite a few people on board that gave us talks along the way about everything imaginable. There was a guy from the UK he gave us a talk on birds, and he actually has personally identified 7,000 species of birds. And as you can imagine, it actually put one of my travel mates asleep during his talk because he was just unending. Here's another research station we passed, the Peru research station, Machu Picchu, obviously named. And you can see the weather as we go north is getting a little bit more overcast. So we kind of headed up Gerlache Strait. We actually passed the Davis Coast, which is interesting because turns out that John Davis was supposedly the first person to land on Antarctic continent in 1821. And I never knew this, and I'm trying to find out from my sister whether or not we could be related. He's an American, English-born sealer, and apparently landed here. So we're headed up here, and we're headed to Deception Island, and then later on we'll go all the way up to Elephant Island. And you can see in red the number of research stations down there. It's just unbelievable from every country imaginable. So it's kind of interesting. Poland has a research station, Ukraine, Korea, Just, and of course, all the South American countries, the Czech Republic. It was pretty amazing. So here we are already at Elephant Island. Now, Deception Island, which we went to, is an active volcano, and it has a crater in the center of it that's filled with water. And the captain said that in years past, they were able to take their cruise ship into the crater, but recently they were not. They haven't been allowed to go in there. They didn't think it was safe. And it was pretty overcast when we went by there, but we could see kind of the view that you see here. This is a little tip of Elephant Island. And this is where Shackleton's crew was marooned. Right here, I have another slide more closer up, but there's a little monument here. And his crew spent 22 months here on Elephant Island waiting for to be rescued, and lived off of seals. And interestingly enough, nobody died during that whole cruise. So here's a little bit more of a close-up, and you can see all the seals on the rocks around this little monument. And I often wondered if they must have kept themselves up the rocks a bit, because it looks like here, unless it's all iced over, that they would be pretty much close to the ocean. You can't really see because my camera's not good enough, but there's a bunch of seals on the water, on the land here too, on the rocks. And I was amazed how close the boat was to these sites. It was just like right there. Now this is a view looking north from the Elephant Island, where the Shackleton's crew was, and you can see, this all these rocks are just filled with penguins, just literally thousands of penguins. And we were sitting there looking at these, trying to figure out how in the heck, why do these penguins go way up onto these rocks, and then how do they get back to the ocean? Because they're really up there, and they can't just jump in because they'll hit rocks below. So they must have some pretty good paths where they can make their way. So I guess it's fair to say that we saw more penguins on this trip than any other form of wildlife. Mm-hmm. And it actually was clearing a little bit as we kind of went north, as we were getting ready to leave Antarctica itself. We basically spent 4 total days there, kind of cruising the ports. Now here's a little iceberg. You can see it's filled with a number of penguins, and I don't know if this video will actually play for people. You can see the penguins jumping in the water below, and they're all kind of doing a dance here. And seem to be pretty happy. You can usually tell when there's a bunch of penguins because they leave their stool kind of stains the snow. Their stool kind of stains the snow kind of a reddish brown. Here's almost a parting glacier once we were getting up further away from as we're leaving the peninsula area. And here is like when we were leaving Antarctica, and we did see some whales waving goodbye to us. There was quite a host of people with their high resolution cameras. Most of them were taking pictures of birds and such, but there were some whales. Not much show going on though. Like this is about it really. So that was Antarctica. And then we headed up to the Falkland Islands. Oh, and I was going to say, before I go into the Falkland Islands, I was going to say that Shackleton, he left his crew on Elephant Island, and then he and 3 other gentlemen got in a lifeboat and they traveled all the way to the South Georgia Islands, which are quite a distance. I want to say at least 600 nautical miles, and eventually came back with to a Norwegian whaling station. Eventually came back and rescued his crew off of Elephant Island. Sadly enough, this all happened during World War One, like 1914 and 1916. And when they got back to England, the majority of the crew went into the service, went to France, and the majority of quite a few of the crew were killed in World War One. But nobody died on this entire excursion or entire expedition that Shackleton went on. So here we are in the Falkland Islands, and it's a pretty desolate area. It's there's quite a few people that live in Stanley, and then it's a lot of farms and such. We actually had lunch with a retired Argentinian colonel in the Navy, and he was very non-political. He said, "Hey, I was in the Navy, and we were involved in trying to take over the Falkland Islands. They were actually based out of Ushuaia, and of course it was unsuccessful. But you don't actually see much. There's not much conflict going on. Although on the Falkland Islands there are some areas where they're still worried about landmines. So there are signs around saying, hey, don't walk around here." So we walked around Stanley a little bit in the surroundings. There's a nice church that we went into, and we took a excursion out to a farm. Along the way, you pass Boot Hill, and people apparently get rid of their boots and shoes and sandals here. And I was thinking, I only have one pair of shoes. I don't really think I want to leave them on the hill. So I didn't. So we headed over to Joe's Gentoos at Newlands Station in the Falklands. And of course, they have more penguins. And again, we were up close. We were only a couple feet away from these guys, and they're not scared of humans at all. You can just walk amongst them. And I didn't try to pet any of them, but they're just right there. So the next night we got on the cruise ship and we headed up to Montevideo, Uruguay, and spent the day there. We went to a lunch show with tango. And before I had mentioned about tango, the Uruguayans actually say that they actually invented the tango, whereas Argentina people think they did. I think there are slightly different versions of the dancing. So I guess they both probably did simultaneously. But we just spent the day in Montevideo, walking around town and seeing the sights. I think we walked about 6 or 7 miles through the town. It was interesting, and then we headed back to Buenos Aires that night to end the cruise. So we had decided. I'll say one more thing about the Antarctic. So I told a group of guys on the ship. I said, I signed up for this excursion on the ship where they put me on a lifeboat with a couple other guys, and we're going to sail to the South Georgia Islands, kind of to reenact Shackleton's trip. And these guys thought I was serious, and they were like, "Oh, that's so cool!" I wish, oh man, I wish I knew about that. So my humor, I had to say, no, it's not really an excursion. So we get back to Buenos Aires, and we had decided to go to Iguazu Falls because of the movie The Mission, which was filmed back in 1986 with Robert De Niro and Jeremy Irons. And it's a great movie, and the soundtrack is amazing. But we decided to go there just because of the movie that inspired us all those years ago, almost 30 years ago. So we booked a flight up to the Iguazu, and on JetSmart, which is a South American airline, which was interesting because the airfare can change from $500 for round trip up there to $200, literally within an hour. It goes all over the place. I don't know if their app wasn't working very well, but we ended up getting a pretty cheap flight. And so we stayed at a resort actually in the jungle, not too far from the airport. But we were definitely in the jungle, and it was not a big resort, but it was really nice, and we had a great time. So we spent 2 days in Iguazu Falls. We had a Brazilian tour guide who picked us up 2 mornings, and we toured first the Brazilian side for the whole day, and then the second day we spent on the Argentinian side. And the falls are just, unbelievably large. Um, they just go on and on. Everywhere you look, there's falls. And it was amazing how close we were able to get to the edge of the falls from all different directions. We would take hikes along these sort of cliffs, and not difficult hiking at all. It was just, breathtakingly beautiful wherever we were. Um, some of the times we had really good vantage points like this, and other times we're right down by the falls. You can see there's a lot of people. Apparently, the mission had made Iguazu Falls quite the tourist stop in South America. So there's quite a few people visiting. Um, and interesting enough, I tried another one of my jokes on a couple of people at lunch. I said that I had scheduled an excursion where I climb up the side of one of the falls on a rope, but they make you drag up some armor that you have to carry up, which of course is one of the scenes from the mission. And of course, these guys took me seriously too and said, "That's really cool. Wish we could do that." And I had to say, "No, it's not really true. It's a movie." Um, so here's another view of that little walkway that you can go out on, and you can see the falls are just coming down anywhere and everywhere. There are a lot of animals there, and I didn't take too many pictures of them, but you can see there were a lot of animals, and there's jaguars as well. We didn't see a jaguar the entire time. The people at the resort told us that the jungle around the resort is there's jaguars in it. So be careful if you're taking walks at dusk and stuff. But we didn't see any jaguars, fortunately. Or if we were in a safe place, it would have been neat to take some pictures. Um, but we continue to hike around the falls, and you're literally, I mean, you can literally walk in the water right there if you want to, because it's just pretty amazing. And then on the second day, we also did a little boat trip up to go underneath the falls so we could all get soaking wet. And that was pretty cool, but it's kind of like going to Niagara Falls, which I did when I was a kid. Um, but you can see the falls are just unbelievably massive and loud too. Um, they the amount of water is just, and you're just right down there in it. I mean, we're over here on a walkway, and there's a bunch of people over here on this little place, but it's pretty amazing. So, and here we are. We're at the end. Um, so I'll just finish by saying, so after we finished, that day, we went back, spent another night at the resort, and we flew back to Buenos Aires. And the interesting thing, I don't, it's ever changing the currency, but Buenos Aires, we pretty much Ubered around or Lyft rides around. And it was amazing. You could take a 20-minute ride on Lyft, and the charge would be like $5. It was amazingly cheap. So, but we had a really good time. So I guess that's probably that's all I should say about this little trip.
So, Jeff, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm going to ask you now if you could stop sharing the screen.
Okay,
And
that might be okay. See it? All right.
okay, you've stopped it. Perfect. And I'll ask, let me just put my video back on. Sorry about that. Video. Yeah, I'm back on. Are there any comments or questions from the audience for Jeff?
I have a question.
Okay, Peter.
Those were fabulous photographs, Jeff, and we were sure that they were taken with something much grander than what we use. Is that one of the newer iPhones?
No, it's actually an iPhone 14.
There you
So I
go.
guess it is one of the newer ones, but
This one's a 13, and yours look much better than ours.
I don't know. I was actually amazed, but until actually, well, I only saw some of the pictures the guys were taking through their little lens, but there were all kinds of people at the front of the ship with the 1,000 millimeter lenses and stuff. And the ship, the water is really deep right there, so we could get up very close to the shore. In fact, being on some Navy ships in the past, I was a little concerned that we were too close.
I imagine his depth sounder was protecting you.
Yeah.
Oh, that was good. Thanks very much.
So I'll make a comment and then see if other people wish to comment or ask questions. I went down to Antarctica many years ago now, in February, um, and we went in a small ship that only would take about 120 people, something like that. And it's quite a different experience as you might expect. When we were crossing the Drake Passage, we'd heard from some people before that they'd come across and it was quiet, it was just calm like a lake. And my thought was this was supposedly the roughest ocean in the world. And I wanted to experience the roughness of the roughest ocean of the world rather than the calm of a lake. And I was very lucky that way, in that there was a storm crossing in our
No.
path. The captain had to make a decision. Was he going to go and try to outrun the storm and go in front of it, or was he going to wait until the storm had passed a little bit and go behind it? He chose to go behind it, but our swells were between 6 and 8 meters, so more like about 18 to 24 feet. And you could feel it. But it was exciting. The water
Yeah.
was splashing all over the whole ship. Our windows were just waves were going past the windows. But when you try to sleep at night, the every time the ship went up and it came back down, you hear bang.
Yeah.
Then you'd be rolling from side to side. And the first night that we were on the ship, the tables in the dining room were moving spontaneously. It was a little bit difficult to have dinner, but it was fun. You got accustomed to it after a while. And the other thing about the small ships is that we did get to go on shore, and we went out on the Zodiacs twice a day, every day. Um, so it was a different experience. And when you go on shore, you end up being with the penguins, and you see how the penguins go from the water up to the hills along what are called penguin pathways.
Yeah.
It's a different experience. This
Yeah.
is a lot calmer and easier if you get seasick.
Well, the people that I know in the U.S. Navy say the Drake Passage is the worst in terms of roughness of seas. So they were all a little concerned when I said, "Oh, we're going to go to Antarctica." And I had been on an aircraft carrier from Hawaii to San Diego years ago, in 100-foot swells. And of course, the carrier is quite large, but I was in the back of the ship for a bit watching the swells, and I noticed they're above. They were, the carrier deck is about 85 feet above the water, and the swells were higher than the carrier deck itself. So it was kind of scary for me anyway.
So you weren't able to go into Deception Island proper. Do you know if any of the smaller ships can go in still? Because we were able to go in there and go on shore.
Yeah, I think they pretty much stopped people from going in there. According to what the captain was saying, he was saying, there had been some, they thought maybe there had been some activity, volcanic activity, and they weren't allowing anybody to go in there. Which, it was pretty calm when we were there, and I was a little bit disappointed because I was like, that would have been cool to actually just cruise in there.
Right.
But
So any other questions or comments?
Yeah, you got a lot of nice shapes in your pictures.
yeah.
And I think it's another way of looking at Antarctica, and I think there really you showed some really nice pictures there. So
Well, we went on this cruise because our friends recommended it, and along with some friends, periodontists from California, they had done it before, and they were going to do it again because they thought it was so great. And I have to say that, I think it might be cool to walk on some of the land, but it was sure nice to be on a nice boat, have really good food, and everything to be really calm, but you could just walk outside and the view would just be like unbelievable right in front of your eyes. So it was also incredibly cheap compared to those smaller cruise. Like an 8-day cruise on an exploration vessel costs about 2.5 times what we paid for 17 days. So it was quite economical, I guess.
yeah.
Could you share with us the name of the resort in by the falls?
Oh, I knew you were going to ask that question. I was trying. My wife probably could pull it up somewhere, but it was pretty close to the airport. Interesting enough, we landed at the Iguazu airport, and we caught taxis they didn't have Uber or Lyft. We caught taxis to the resort, and these guys wanted $20 in cash. That was the only way you could pay them. So we were like, okay, we've got $20, $20 US dollars. Everybody was in the US dollars down there because the Argentinian currency was not doing well. So we get to the resort, and I hand him my $20 bill, and he goes, "It's crinkled. I can't take that." And fortunately, the friend of ours who came in the next taxi, he had 2 crisp $20 bills. So I was able to pay with one of those. But it was only about a 15-minute ride from the airport, and we were basically in the middle of the jungle.
So Jeff,
Nice. You have your hand up, Amanda.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, as I said in the chat, thank you very much for this teaser, because we're actually leaving on Tuesday. We'll spend a little bit of time in Buenos Aires and then visit Montevideo, because Montevideo is very famous for us obstetricians. And then we're going down to Ushuaia and taking a small 125-person boat across. And honestly, I don't mind if it's calm as a lake when we cross the Drake Passage. I'd be okay with that. But I've signed up for kayaking, so I'll be really interested to see if I get, up close and intimate with some whales or penguins or seals or whatever. I think that'll be really kind of cool.
Yeah, definitely.
And where you tend to do the kayaking, it's usually calm. It's on the peninsula itself. It's not in the Drake Passage anymore.
Right.
So Jeff, I was intrigued by your comment about using Uber and Lyft, because when we were there, we were in Antarctica in 2018, and in Buenos Aires, cab rides were a very stressful activity. they had numerous ways of extracting a little more money from you than they might have done. When you use Uber, I mean, do they just run the same app that they would run here so that the price is kind of really not calculated by the driver? It's calculated by Uber, and
Right.
that would solve a lot of problems.
Oh, it totally was. I mean, we went down there sort of unprepared. I guess we thought we'd take taxis or whatever. But when we tried our Uber apps, they worked. And
Mhm.
now I will say that if I take an Uber or a Lyft ride to the airport in Vancouver, and I'm usually in a quite nice SUV or something, usually a pretty nice car. Down there, you were in these beater cars
Right.
that and they were big enough to put our luggage in, although we didn't carry a lot of luggage. But I was amazed how cheap they were. And we never ended up never taking a taxi because the Ubers ended up being more convenient.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
so
it
yeah,
works the same way. You can find out where one is and select the one that's closest and all that good stuff.
yeah, totally worked like that.
I
It
think
was really
that's a really good travel tip, to be honest,
well,
because
you never
cabs
know.
in many countries can be, well, as I say, a source of the driver extracting a little more from you than was maybe totally warranted. The other comment I would like to make is I think, we were on a small ship, and I was very interested in your experiences, which sounded great. The one thing that really was stood out for me on the small ship is you go ashore, there are no customs, there's no immigration. This is not a country. And
Right,
particularly today, when travel is becoming quite fraught with fingerprinting, photographs, visas, etc. There, at least when we were there in 2018, there was none of that, and it
yeah,
really added one more little thing that was really quite special. So,
yeah. I think it's quite. It would be quite bizarre not to have your face taken a picture of or
yeah,
and no border guard saying, hey, you can't go here or whatever.
but
I
thank you. It was a
actually
really interesting talk.
I thought at some point I used to think it would be really cool to go to some of the research stations just to see what they're like, but actually seeing them from the boat, they didn't look all that interesting to me.
So we did manage to go on to the research station at Port Lockroy, and you can get your passport stamped to say you were in Antarctica. You can
Right,
mail a letter, yes, and you can see some of the paraphernalia, like a museum a little bit in the building, as to how people used to be there when they first set up the station, and it was not when it was a research station. It was a military kind of installation at one
right.
time. So it was quite
Yeah, I know.
interesting.
I think it's fascinating to think that why anybody in any military thought that that would be a strategic place to have people. But
So talking about Uber and travel, Richard, we were just in Cape Town in the summer, and every time we need to go anywhere, we use Uber. And the local people there said, use Uber, don't use a taxi. It's much cheaper and it's very good.
Mhm.
And it was wonderful. There were 9 of us, and we sometimes would call two Uber XLs because we had luggage, and they would come. They were prompt. They were fixed price, and and the price was you could have it shown in South African rand, or you can have it shown in Canadian dollars as you wish. But the price was the price. And Uber has only, I think, a 1% fee for exchanging from rand or any other currency to Canadian dollars or US dollars if you're in the US. So it's quite cheap as far as the foreign exchange transfer goes compared to some of the other companies. And we used it again recently in Lyon in France, just 2 weeks ago. And again, the people in our hotel said, call Uber, don't get a cab. It's much cheaper to get from the hotel to the airport, downtown, wherever. And they were prompt. The vehicles were reasonable vehicles. In fact, in Cape Town, they were wonderful vehicles, better than
oh,
the ones we got in Lyon. I guess it's a matter of what kind of vehicles are driven around in those places, how good they are.
Yeah.
So you can use Uber pretty well anywhere. Good idea to ask the people locally what they tend to use, and they'll tell you.
The only regrets I have after I do one of these trips is that always, when we go to like Montevideo or we go to Buenos Aires, that we don't stay longer. And I don't necessarily like or feel the need at my age to go into the museums, but I really like just getting into the culture and getting around the people and going through, where people live in the shops and, getting sort of embedded in their culture, and I kind of miss, and I kind of think, oh, we should have went a week early or we should have stayed, but.
Well,
Amanda,
I'll make a plug, Jeff, for house swapping, because that's what we're doing again in Buenos Aires. We've got an apartment there that we did through house swap, and we've got it for, I think, 9 or 10 days. I even kept it open while we go to Montevideo so we didn't have to take all our Antarctica luggage with us. But it's a really nice way to kind of embed yourself in the community.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
6 weeks in 100.
Yeah.
okay, any other questions, comments? So if not, this is the last session we have for this year. I want to thank Jeff again for volunteering to do this. It was wonderful, Jeff, so thank you.
Hopefully.
And we'll start back again in January. I think Richard Stokes, I think you're going to be on in January to talk. And he's nodding his head. Okay, thank you. So thanks everybody and happy holidays. And we'll see you back in January.
All right.
Thank you.